Okay, so we've made a bit of progress here in terms of setting up the inventory system, or the remake. What I'm going to do now, though, I'm just going to quickly have a poke around of the current system just to see if there's anything that I might need to put in specifically. There's quite a lot of things in here. Increase item amount. It's already an infantry. So we do have find item class here. Of course, having a utility one that checks for it. Yeah. There has item of class. Is what we can do. For that, it's going to be fairly straightforward. I'm just going to use the find item of class node. And I'm just doing is valid on there. I'm going to make that pure as well. Yep. Okay, yeah, so this can be quite useful in scenarios where you don't really need the item per se, you just need to know if it exists somewhere in the inventory. Now, there is actually one other thing I could probably deal with here, actually, in the find item of class. So because we are using classes, we do have the possibility of dealing with child classes. So if we look at the input on the find item class, we have a list of all the different classes that we have. So it could be that I just want to know, is there any resource in the inventory? And we kind of just select that, and it would sort of return yes or no. Now, for this particular function, that might not necessarily be as useful, but it's probably something we should probably implement just in case. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to add an input here called of type bool. That's going to be exact match. So I'm just going to add a comment on here. If exact match is false, it will search for child classes. So that kind of gives us an option here, so we can pop a branch at the beginning there, and we can technically do something slightly different if exact match is false. So in this case, actually, is that how I want to do it? Let me have a think. Actually, probably not. So I'm just thinking that we could probably change how this works, because it's all going to be in the same sort of for each loop anyway. So is yes, I did forget that. So it would require us to load the class. Is that what we want? Yeah, so the issue we have is because of this soft ref, we can't actually check if this is a child. Unfortunately. So we do need the actual class, the loaded version. Yeah. So that would mean this would have to be loaded, which does become a little bit problematic. Because ideally, you want to try and async load these classes where possible. Okay, let me think. So I'm going to go on the basis that I'm going to do branch on here. If exact match is true, yeah, I'm gonna go for the first idea. I'm gonna do a separate branch. If this is false, what I'm gonna do is resolve this reference, check if it's valid. So if it is valid, then we know it's already loaded and we can just do what we want to do. So I'm going to grab this, and then what we do is child. Though I should probably do this as a sequence. So do this as, promote this to a local variable, so do this as loaded class. Actually, no, I'm going to do that as parent class. That makes a little bit more sense. If it's not loaded, so its valid class will be false. Tidy this up a little bit. What I want to do is async, not async, I want to do load asset blocking. I want to cast the item base class, and then we can set that there. And then we can add that to the bottom, do all this. Though, as I'm looking at this, I'm just thinking actually. So if we're trying to find an item of class in the infantry, if we don't actually need to do this at all, we don't need to load it. Because if it's already in the infantry, then the class would already be loaded. Hopefully that makes sense. Because for the object to exist, the class has to be loaded. So we can actually ignore all this. And instead just do actually use it as a edge case to just return early. So if this is if it's not valid, then the class isn't loaded, so therefore it can't exist in the infantry. So we might as well just return at this particular point. That needs to be a sequence. So if we don't return, then we can come down here. We'll remove that. So I do apologise, I'm all over the place. So because we're going on the basis there that if the class isn't loaded, then therefore it's not done it. So we can then just do, I'm just going to do a branch here instead, and then do exact. The exact match, we're going to do the top one. And I'm just going to just brought this to a local variable. I'm just going to call this one loop object or loop item. There we go. And that's just to help me tidy things up a little bit and hopefully remove some of these cross lines. And then down here we can then do something similar. So we want a branch. This time we just want to get the class and the do is child. And then for the item class we can just resolve and put that into there. Oh, it's always nice when we don't have to load something in. That is true, we can then return. Okay, so let me quickly run through this again just to make sure it does what I think it should. So the first thing we do is we check the item class, we attempt to resolve it. So that's essentially saying, is this loaded? Is it in memory? If it is, then this will be valid. So we just check, is it valid? If it's not, then this item doesn't exist. So we just return and do the null. If it's true, however, it means we can then come down onto the then one branch, so the next one. This is when we then start to loop through the items and we check, are we after an exact match? Or are we wanting to check for child classes? Yep. Okay, so that should do what I expect it to do. So in here has item of class. We can actually simplify. Simplify? An item of class. The exact match. We can't simplify, but what we can do is we can do a similar trick as we do up here. So if the class isn't valid, that means it's never been loaded, we can just automatically return false. Because again, if the class isn't loaded, it doesn't exist in the inventory. So that saves us having to even attempt to loop through the items if we don't need to. Let's just tidy this up a little bit. Okay, so there we go. Hopefully that makes some sense there. Okay, so let's jump back to the current system and let's see if there's anything else in here that we probably need. So this is getting the item amount from the inventory that's based on the item name. Okay, yeah, so that could be useful. So get item amount. So in this particular example, obviously what we do need to do is consider whether or not the item is stackable or not. Now, so what we can do, let me think. So we can add the item class here. So item class. Now the thing is, we can't actually get any data from this soft reference. So we could obviously attempt to resolve it, but the issue is it's only a class ref, which means that we can get the defaults, which can be good. But it's just something to be aware of, that in some cases this might not always be an applicable option, particularly if the value could change at runtime. Now, in terms of is stackable, that's never going to change, so it's always going to be the same regardless for all items. So again, we can kind of do a similar trick here where we attempt to resolve this, and we do an is valid on that. And if that is not valid, then the item isn't in the inventory, can't ever be in the inventory system because it's not loaded. So for the amount, we can just return 0. We don't need to worry about it at this particular point. If it is valid though, then we can obviously get the class defaults from it and we can start doing some checks. So we can do is stackable to start with, because if it is stackable, so of course normally we would use the function, the getter function, but again, because we're not looking at a specific object, that's not something we can do. And in this particular case, the only reason we made the getter function is because we set it to private to prevent it from being changed at runtime. So the default will be the same as what the getter function would get anyway. So in this example, well, in this case, we want to, if it's stackable, then we're only really looking for one type. So then we can find item of class. And again, I'm going to actually add an exact amount on this. Well, exact match. And the reason why is because you might just want to know the total amount of all the ammo that the player has, for example, or maybe if you've got, maybe having things where you've got stack limits, so they can only have so many in a given stack, so there might be multiple entries on a given item, so you want the total of all of them. So using exact match can sort of do that, particularly if you want sort of the child amounts to be considered as well. So it might be that I want to get all the weapons that the player has. Generally, it's only going to be one, but again, just an example. So for that, we can do. Actually, that's not going to quite do what we want, is it? So if it's stackable, that will work. No, it won't. Yes, it will. No, it won't. Okay, so yeah, so this one looks like it's going to take a little bit more thought. So the issue I've got here is if it's stackable and we want exact match, then this method is perfectly fine because there's only going to ever be one in there. But if exact match is false, then we possibly need to return multiple items, which this doesn't do. So I think at this point we'll probably need to make a find items of class to return an array of all the item objects. So that's probably what I want to do next. So that's what I'm going to do now. What I'm actually going to do though is I'm going to duplicate the find item of class. Just add an S in there, and just go ahead and change that to an array. Now this time, instead of actually returning, if we find one, we do unfortunately have to keep looping through. But instead we want to add an entry into here. So I'm just going to create a local variable for the return. So found item objects. So of course the length of the array could be 0, so it could be empty by the time it's finished. So again, that should still be a valid case. So just do add. And in this case, we can just add the loop item. Now, as a reminder, the loop item is just what we set here. And you know what? I'm just going to do that. Okay, so I think that should do what we want. So we can do the find items. And I'm actually just going to replace this. I'm just wondering whether or not we need to consider is stackable or not. Actually, no, I'm going to keep that in. So if it is stackable, we just do the single one. That's going to allow us to end early, which will be super nice. And if not, then we probably want to return multiple, so then we do the lengthier one. Right, so okay, so if we have this one, we should just be able to return the value here. So this is the one where it's stackable. So there should only be one item object in there of the given type. And again, because obviously in this particular project we don't have any particular stack limits at all for a particular object. And then for this one, we kind of need to do this a little bit different. So for this we need to do a for each loop and do a find. And I'm just going to put that to a local variable. It's going to be item total. And we just want to add the amounts together. Like so. I'm just going to swap these around a little bit. Again, not strictly necessary. And then when we finish that loop, we can just return again and just return the item total. So hopefully that makes sense. So quickly run through it one last time. So we get item amount, so we come in with the item class, we check to see if it's loaded or not. If it's not loaded, then it can't be in the inventory at all. No, it can't be in any inventory, potentially. So we come down here and we just return 0. If it is a valid class, so it is loaded, we get the class defaults and we check if it's stackable. If it is stackable, we just use the find item of class, so we try and find where it is, and then we just return the amount that we have. If it is not stackable, then we find all the entries of a given class, if there is any, and we just add the totals together and return the amount when done. Right, so now we're starting to get to the point here where we've got quite a few things that we're doing here on loops. So for these ones, we probably don't want to set them as pure. That way it'll just cache the value, so that way we can reuse it without having to go through all the loops again. So that can be a little bit more efficient. So now we have the get item of class, so get item amount. So again, we can just specify how many the class, and then say whether it wants exact match or not. Okay. What I do probably want to do though, find item of class. I'm just going to set the default value to true on the exact match, because in a lot of cases that's probably what people what will be needed, and then you can untick it if you want to check for a specific parent. So again, just setting the default there on the inputs, that just makes it so it starts ticked. That's all. So now this has item of class. It's only the one loop. Do I? I'm just wondering whether or not I should make this non-pure, which I probably should. We'll check what these look like. But yeah, that's looking pretty good. Let's quickly jump back to the current infantry system again and quickly see what else is in here that we might need to sort of recreate the functionality for. So let's make an item data. So probably not that one. Maybe. Well, technically I think that might be a create item of class. So we don't want to do that. We do not want to compare text. Just because when you localize the text, it would be different. Increase, I think that's specific for ammo amounts, which we don't need. Stuff for infantry stuff, storage even. Don't think that's needed either. Find item by name, which we could technically add. But if we do everything by class, I don't think it makes much of a difference. Searching by class would probably be better anyway. Unique ID, not particularly useful. In a lot of cases, unique IDs are only necessary for saved game stuff. The uniqueness would be the object itself. But if it's stacking, then it doesn't need to be unique, if that makes sense. So it's only going to be unique for non-stackables, but then there's going to be an individual object reference for it. I do apologise, I'm kind of just verbalising my thought process. Hopefully give you a little bit of an insight there. So is item in infantry, we've got that one. Get item amount from infantry, we've just done that one, which is the get item amount. There's some trace stuff here. I believe that's for spawning the item in the world. We'll get to that later, I think. Remove item by amount. So we do have a decrement here. Just wondering if it's worth... What I'm going to do, I'm going to actually add an input here for amount. I'm going to set the default value to 1. But then we can use the same function if we want to specify different amounts. Yeah. I think that's what I'm going to do here. So that should then take care of that. See what else we have. Remove item all. So I believe... Okay, yeah, so that's essentially a remove item, but for every single one of a given type. So we have a remove item by class. We have a think. Actually, I'm glad I spotted those. The decrement item one, I did not set the default. There we go. So remove item by class. This is going to find the first item. Okay, so yeah, I don't think we want an exact match on that. I think we want it to always be an exact match. I think if we was to provide a parent class, that's probably cause some problems. It'd be a little bit unpredictable. I think they do have remove item. I'm just wondering whether or not we could make some modifications to this particular function and just add a little text box, or whether or not it's worth doing an entirely new function. And I think a new function would probably be better. I'm trying to think actually. If yeah, new function. So remove all items with class. So I'm just going to rename this. That should be of class. Remove item of class. So remove all items of class. So again, we need an input on there with the item base. I'm going to do that as soft reference and do that as item class. Again, we'll do a quick resolve at the start there, and we'll do a quick is valid check. Again, if it's not valid, then we don't need to do anything because it's not loaded. It doesn't exist. Then just a quick return value. This just to denote whether or not we've successfully removed the items. That's false. If it is a valid class, then what we can do is find items of class. The item class. Again, I'm going to leave exact match ticked in this particular example. What we can then do is we can probably just do a force remove. Sorry. Yeah, it's not going to let me do all of them together, unfortunately, but we'll do a for each loop. And we'll just loop through all those, and we'll assume that if the loop was completed, then we've successfully removed them all. However, just in between here, this itself could still return null, so an empty array. So what I want to do is just check the length. So is not empty. If it's not empty, then we'll do this a little bit. If it is empty, then we can assume that we've not removed the items because they never existed. So again, I'm choosing to return false, so it fails essentially. Sorting out these lines a little bit. Okay, so we've got remove all items of class. So if there's only ever one entry, because it's stackable, for example, we would force removing it anyway, so the amount doesn't matter. We've removed them all. If it's not stackable, then in theory it should find multiple. Is that the case? Find items. Yes, that should be the case. Yeah, although I should probably check get default class defaults. I should probably check to see if it is stackable, because I can call a different function here, and that could mitigate having to do the full loop if we don't need to. Like so. So it is stackable. So this branch would be on the false. If it is stackable, then we just want to find the item of the class. And as a reminder, this is the one that will automatically end the moment it finds it, so it doesn't need to complete the loop. It can, of course, be null, so we just want to do a quick is valid check on there. And if it is valid, we can then come through and just remove it from there. And again, we're just ignoring the amount of quantity in this particular example because we want to remove all of them. That is the sole function of this function. Okay, so I've got the return value there. Actually, I'm just going to connect that one. It should be true, but you know, yeah. Okay, and then we just need to add the item class up here. I think that is now done. Yeah, so remove all items of class. I'm wondering, do I want to do it where you can specify? Because being able to do a parent would be quite cool. Yeah, we can do that. So I'll copy this up to here. And then we can just get stackable, and that's not true. No, is that right? So if that exact match is true, then it should always go down to the bottom because we need to search for multiple. Yeah, that should be right, I think. Okay, so let me run through that again just to make sure it's correct in my own head. So check is valid, yeah. So class default, is it stackable? So if that's true and exact match is false, we can come up to the top here because it only ever needs to return one item object, which is fine. If, however, it is stackable but exact match is true, then it gets turned to false. So that means we have to come down to false, which makes it do the find items of class. So that'll return multiple items that we can then remove. If it's not stackable, then it's always going to come down false anyway. So exact match wouldn't play a role in that particular equation. Yeah, so that should work. So remove all items of class. So again, we've got the exact match on there. So I'm going to set the default to that to true again. Lovely. So I think in quite the collection here, let's just pop these in just to see what we've got. Sometimes I like to do this just to see what the nodes look like and helps me visualise what I might use them for. So these are all the utility ones. And then these are the remove ones are all the default values. Get item amount. The input there is not set to true. The default, there we go. Amount there for 1, 1, yeah. Okay, so I think we're looking pretty good there.